Snow swept across the field like breath drawn in and never let out, a white that devoured horizon and sound. It hissed against iron and leather, worried at cloaks and chilled the blood until fingers forgot they were fingers. Beneath that whitening world, the dead moved. They moved without hurry, without hunger, because hunger is a mortal thing. They moved with the patience of a glacier and the certainty of a tide. And in the middle of that tide, there stood a man with eyes like caves in winter. He watched a swordsman run to meet him. The living always ran. The swordsman's blade was dark gray and old. A strip of starry night hammered into a sword, and it had cut a king's hand once, doomed a demon named Heroes. It was called Longclaw. The man who held it had a face all the North knew. Stern mouth, wary eyes, hair gone longer and darker with each season of war. Jon Snow. He came forward through drift and wind and ruin, his breath a cloud, his hands tight on the pommel, and behind him the last of the living shouted a name made short by cold. Jon went to kill a myth. The myth raised an arm. Steel met a blade of blue so pale it was nearly nothing at all, and that nearly nothing split the air and split the sword and split the life that had been carried so far by stubbornness and heart. The crack rang out like the world breaking and silence swelling in behind it. Jon staggered, Longclaws shattered half still in his hand, and he lifted it again because that was the kind of man he was, because there were sisters behind him and a castle and a tree with a face that had watched generations pass and would be asked now to watch them end. The pale blade slid under his ribs. Not fast. It was never fast. That was Mercy's trick, not the cold's. The cold slid in and stole the warmth, and Jon's breath went out in a question that had no words. There had been 1,000 endings for him, long whispered beside cook fires. The king that never was, the crow who traded black for silver, the bastard who found he was not. There had been talk of prophecies older than the hills. But when the Night King set a hand upon Jon's chest, the first rush was not ancient song. It was something less noble and more ordinary. The smell of winter apples stored in a cellar at Winterfell, the sound of Arya laughing at him from the top of a wall she wasn't meant to climb, the taste of black bread and onion stew, the way Ghost leaned heavier into a scratch as if determined to push himself into the hand doing the scratching. The cold touched those things. It did not blot them out. It laid them flatter, like vellum smoothed by a palm, pressed them and kept them. A low crackling, like a forest freezing all at once, came out of Jon's bones as the blue spread from the wound. The Night King did not lift his hand. The blue moved through the spaces between ribs and the spaces between memories. It threaded itself into the places a man uses to know his own name. Jon's eyes opened, and they were no longer only his. He rose into the hush of a world that had quit saying his name. What stood up moved with the coordination of a dancer and the deliberation of a gravemaker. The dead shifted around him, opening a path. He walked it, not a man, not a white entirely either, but a binding, a claim. Under snow so heavy it made the sky sag. He crossed to the heart tree in Winterfell's Godswood. The carved face regarded him with that impossible sadness that belongs to wood, that secret grief that pretends not to care. Red sap bled like slow tears. A girl with a knife watched between branches. She had grown on rooftops and under tables, behind barrels and inside myths. Her mouth was chapped raw but held steady. The knife looked like a sliver of midnight. She had run through 1,000 shapes to return to this one, the shape of herself, and all the while she had kept a single truth bright in the center. No one kills my brother. The truth trembled now like a lamp in a wind because this was not her brother, not as she knew him. Yet there he was, the slope of the shoulder she had chased in snow, the hand that had held hers when father was gone and mother too. She moved to rise, to run, to do as she had done before, to fly straight at the unreality like a hawk at a snake. She stopped instead. Not because fear had her, because love had her. Say his name, a whisper said in the leaves, and that was no normal whisper. It was the rustle of 1,000 leaves remembering. It was the boy who had sat long hours under this tree and listened to stories no mouth had told him. It was Bran, threading himself into wood and wind, his sight going farther than flesh could walk, farther than raven could fly. He had seen the blue move through Jon's body and he had not screamed or wept. He had watched the weave of it, patient as a spider counting the strands of its own web. Say it. Say it like you do when you want him to stop being foolish. Arya closed her eyes. The knife warmed in her palm as if it were a living thing and liked being called to work. She made her mouth into a blade shaped like a word. Jon. He did not startle. The dead do not startle. But the blue's surface rippled. A winter pond where a thrown stone makes small rings. His head turned, not much, but it turned, and the mouth that had said her name when it mattered did not open. He walked on past the tree and toward the outer wall. He did not climb. The gates opened. Sansa stood on the inside of them, cloak heavy, hair braided in a pattern that meant to tell people she could not be frightened into mistakes. She did not move when he approached. Her hands were folded before her where all could see them shaking. Behind her, Tyrion Lannister had his breath in his throat like he meant to swallow it. Beside them stood a woman who bore fire in her blood. Daenerys on a ground chilled to an idea, and the fire behind her wore scales and spat steam. You will not, Sansa S.A. ID, the words tiny in the storm, but there was no reason to make them large. Either they would work or they would not. Jon's head turned toward her the way it had toward Arya, like snow answering the suggestion of a wind. In his eyes, the blue gave nothing back. He could have walked past her. He did not. He paused, as if listening to a memory of a lesson that had nothing to do with swords and everything to do with supper. Do not let him near the crypts. Bran's whisper came again, and Sansa felt the absurdity of laughter almost climb into her mouth, as if the dead in the crypts needed a brother to wake them. Daenerys raised her chin and tilted it, and the dragon behind her responded. Fire licked at its own mouth, impatient, famished. The creature knew heat and knew hunger and loved both. The woman it loved most had learned to live with that love as if it were a clever weapon with only one edge. If he comes nearer, the small man said at her side softly, you must pretend it is a stranger. Pretend it is a stranger. Pretend that blood is water. Pretend that grief is something you might take off like a soaked cloak. Sansa looked at the man whose counsel had always been wrapped in small jokes and found him stripped of jokes, of masks, of anything but knowledge. She nodded, and in that nod there were years chewed down into shape. Rooms in the capital with doors that did not open when they should. Roads that ran toward rescue and turned into circles instead. Men who smiled with everything but their eyes. The nod said, I can pretend. Jon looked up, not toward Daenerys or Sansa, but beyond them to the broken towers. He stood a while as if taking their measure, the measure of walls and people and the tree's grief. Then he moved away. He did not glance back. The gates closed again. The white of the world took him. At the far edge of that white, the Night King raised another hand and the ground answered. Swords and spears and songs fell silent under the snow. The snow was not only cold, it was command. From the woods, shapes rose whose knees did not creak anymore. In the field, men who had learned to die well rose and learned the other discipline, endurance devoid of purpose. Jon took his place at the front of them, and when he raised the half of Longclaw he still held, the dead mimicked the living one last time. They cheered. The cheer had no sound, yet every living ear heard it. There are books that pretend knowledge of such magics. Samwell Tarly read them until his eyes puffed like fruit left too long in sun, and the ink crawled on the page because the pages had been copied by men whose old fingers would not keep still. Those books spoke of binding, not only making a corpse get up, but knitting it to an intention like a seam in a boot, a seam that will not turn aside water or snow. They had notes, too, about unbinding. No one had written those notes with confidence. There were smudges where hands had trembled. There were words like only and unless, and usually placed in lines like pebbles across a stream, never promising a dry foot. Sam turned pages that smelled of forgotten cellars and had marginalia in 3 hands at least, and he muttered aloud with that little breathy insistence he carried like a lantern. It says the cold is not only the absence of heat, it is will made patient. It says the will is what must be broken. Break the Night King, Davos said, simpler. Yes, Sam agreed, and then added, not because he wanted to, but because he was made of a kind of honesty that did not win prizes, or break the conduit. The what? Gendry asked, because he was a smith and heard conduits in everything. Where metal speaks to heat, where shape speaks to force. The path between their will and ours, Sam said, and did not meet Arya's eyes. A binding is not merely thread. It is thread wound through a body that remembers, like a loom. It uses what is there, which is why bound captains are the worst of them. The best of us become the best of them. Arya sharpened her knife on her palm, slow, as if the blade might learn something by skin. She thought of her brother tied to a will that was not his. She thought of cutting thread. She thought of cutting other things that felt like cutting that thread. Memories, promises. Bran came to them with snow spangled in his hair like a crown too light to feel, and eyes that had been looking so far away they needed a moment to remember the room. He can still hear his name, Bran said. He does not know it, but he hears it. And if I call his name when I put a knife under his ribs? Arya asked. I do not know, Bran said, plain as a fact. I am done telling you I know what I do not. Tormund snorted a laugh like a horse's, reducing dire complicity to something that could be spat at. You tell names. I'll break heads. That's the plan. The plan wandered. Plans do that. They began as lines on a clear morning and ended as knots in a dark one. The dragonfire warmed the air in pockets, made the snow steam and then freeze again, slick as excuses. They lured the dead toward moats, lit the pitch with tears of something like joy, and they brought another red woman from the east, older than the last and less convinced. She burned a strip of cloth and sang in a language that had no patience for consonants. She put ashes on their cheeks. She lied when she could not help it. She said the fire cared for them. She was kind enough to lie well. At night, Sansa walked on the inner ramparts and rubbed her hands together until the sting felt like proof. Tyrion walked with her and told a story about a cousin who smashed beetles. To keep his mouth from freezing shut, he told it long. Sansa did not laugh. She did not mind that he had told it. She looked at the field where her brother walked with the dead and saw the shape that had come up from the snow and learned it like a person learns bruises. Not by the color of them, but by the way they change the way you move. Daenerys took counsel from no one because she had fed too many counsels to flames. She stood under a sky that was never entirely night now and watched the breath of her dragon draw cranes of smoke over the battlements. Once she said, not testily but tiredly, I could end this by ending him. Which him? Missandei might have asked once, soft as a glove. But Missandei was gone to a place where softness went and stayed, and no one asked the question with her voice anymore. Which him? Tyrion said. He meant the Night King because that was obvious. He also meant Jon. He did not say the second thing out loud. He did not need to. When dragons were first sung of, Daenerys said aloud, perhaps to someone, perhaps to herself, they were sung as hunters of debt. The world owed heat and they collected. I have always thought of mine as collectors on my behalf. It occurs to me now they are simply doing what they are. Maybe that's enough, Tyrion said. Maybe it is not, she returned, and he had no answer that did not look like failure in a mirror. The dead came under the walls. Jon moved like a standard to mark a line. On one day, measured by hunger not time, a giant with a crumbling jaw pushed a tower's footings loose and it sank like a sigh. On another, the dead found the water gate and fell into it until their bodies made a bridge of themselves, and those behind them crossed. The living broke them with oil. You can break the dead. You just have to do it again and again, without pride, without the reward the living ask for in exchange for effort. The reward here was that you woke up and did it again. Bran asked for one more journey to the tree. Sansa said no at first because she had learned recently what it meant to be loved less well by people who claimed to be wise. Then she said yes because he was her brother, and that was a wisdom she had not learned recently. They bled for him. He tasted it in wood and in memory. He went farther north than weather. He found the shape at the center of the white, the place where cold was not only cold anymore but desire. He saw the Night King not as a man with blue eyes but as a field of decisions stacked in a narrow place until they had become a tower that did not fall because it was not built of stone. It was built of stubbornness refined into a shape. Bran touched the bottom of that tower. He felt the bottom was also the top. He felt a memory inside it that wore a brown cloak and wept. Another that laughed at a small absurdity of a hair caught in a snare it had baited itself. A third that did not look like a face at all. He asked for Jon there, because you always ask for what you need in the last places you can get it. The tower did not answer, but the answer came from the thread that ran out of it and down into the moving body that carried Jon's shape. Came not like sunlight, there was no sunlight in that vocabulary, but like the knowledge of sunlight given to a creature made entirely of winter. Jon twisted. His head pitched a fraction, his jaw worked. Inside him a voice sighed as you sigh when you lie down after you did everything and none of it worked. Let me be done. Arya met him at the gate when the dead pressed so near that there was no air left in that part of the world. She did not run to him. She stalked him as if he were already prey. She held the midnight knife like a letter she would deliver even if the house had no door. He looked at her. He looked right at her. The blue did not thaw, but somewhere behind it a boy climbed a banister and grinned at the risk. Somewhere a man stood on a wall in the dark and learned the stars' names to say them when he was alone. She mouthed the letters that made him, whispered them twice. She moved. The Night King moved first. He appeared because he could. He raised his hand, and the knife left Arya's fingers of its own accord, drawn out by frost that made it too slick to hold. It went spinning useless, an arrow missing its target when the target had stepped behind time instead of rock. He caught Arya's throat with a grip that did not tighten or loosen. It simply existed. She clawed at it and found no purchase because there was nothing to purchase. There was only absence shaped like a man. Jon stepped into the hand. He did not seize the wrist that was strangling his sister. He put his throat into the grip until it was his throat held there. The blue will try to pull him away as a hawk pulls at a chain tied to its jess. He replaced one inevitability with another. Jon Snow's inevitability had never been victory. It had been refusal to let others go first to die. He looked directly at the Night King and thought nothing, because thinking had never done him any good at the edge. He pressed his own neck tight against that hand. Bran spoke in the weirwood and the words ran through roots, up trunk, out branches, into snow like a current under ice. Sansa stood at the rampart and said his name with her mouth barely open, a breath-shaped syllable, and it was not a strategy. It was the end of lying to herself. Daenerys lifted her hand and made a small motion to the dragon that was not command but permission to be dragon. Fire came. It washed the world until shape lost its deal with matter and everything thought about being gas again. The Night King did not burn because he had chosen a world where fire was a suggestion. But the thing between him and the living had a hinge. The hinge had always been Jon. Fire reached the hinge. Hinge heated. Hinge screamed. Not a sound. A turning. Hinges are not made to bear love. They are made to bear weight. Love poured into that point from three mouths said three ways and from a green sight that remembered things before people were a word in the stories. The Night King's hand did not melt. It let go. No one could have told you why. He could not have either. Will met Will and the oddest thing happened to Will. It slipped. Arya fell into snow, sucking air like it had been invented for her just now. Jon did not step back out of the fire. He could not. The blue inside him had learned a trick. It began to leave him by the same door that the warmth had once used coming in. He closed his eyes. It is difficult to die the second time. It is a choice. He thought because thought was all he had left. The apples in the cellar, the stew, the laugh, the wolf. He thought those things, and the blue in him could not make sense of them. This is why fire wins sometimes, because cold cannot understand an apple. It can only remember the shape an apple once held. The blue cracked inside him. Where it cracked, what remained was too human to stand up. He fell quietly. The Night King looked at the dragonfire turning the air into a tapestry of pain and stepped forward anyway. He did not slip on the hinge again because he walked elsewhere, through a place where rules were his. Daenerys drew the dragon back with a sound like a woman breaking and mending at once. She looked at the shape in the snow that used to be the man she had tried not to love like a weapon and failed. She moved toward him and knew better than to pick him up. He was a door you did not open unless you meant to go through. She knelt. Bran opened his eyes. He broke the thread, he said, and Sam made a small noise that sounded like the first word a child says when it sees the sea. Is he? Davos began and stopped because he had been wrong about such things before. He is not a white, Bran said. He squinted down into something no one else could look into, and the lines at the corners of his mouth changed. He is not only himself either. He has been watered with winter. He will take a while to grow back into who he was. A ridiculous thing happened then. The surviving men and women around Ned Stark's children began to laugh. Not because jokes were told or because joy had been given. They laughed because the pressure that had been on their chests every minute of every cold day had lifted for one breath. The dead fell in waves, their bodies collapsing not into peace but into stillness that felt merciful. The hum of wrongness thinned. The Night King did not vanish. He turned his face to the tree and to the fire and to the people who had loved the man he had tried to make a tool. He tilted his head the way a scholar tilts his head at a puzzle that refuses to be solved. Then he went north, as if he had remembered there was an appointment in a farther storm he would be late for if he tarried. They brought Jon to the Godswood and laid him against roots that had fed on blood before. The tree accepted him without judgment. The sisters set their foreheads against his, one on each side, and made a tunnel out of their grief so he might walk through it. Daenerys stood a small distance away because she knew distance is sometimes love's last good work. Ghost came out of the snow like snow had invented a shaped version of itself and pressed his great head into Jon's ribs. And the sound he made was so low you felt it more than heard it. Jon's eyes, not blue now but not the old dark either, flickered behind lids. In days that followed, it was not stories they needed. It was broth and quiet, sentries who did not fall asleep, boots that did not leak. Jon slept like a traveler who has found an inn without a name at the edge of a map. He woke slow. When he did, he stared at his hands as if he had seen them in someone else's dream. Is it over? He asked. Not the thing in the north, Sansa said. This thing. And she let her hand hang above his fingers for a second before letting it drop to rest in them. This is not over. I will not have it be. He watched her face. He did not apologize for making her a widow without a body to bury and then a sister with half a ghost. Jon had learned gradually that apologies are coins that buy less than you hope. He wanted me, he said. He does not have you, Arya answered, an archer out of arrows willing to throw the bow if it came to it. Sam explained what breaking the thread meant, and Davos turned it into a plan like a man who takes a rumor and makes a map. Daenerys stood on the wall and looked to the north where the Night King had gone. His going had not been retreat. It had been adjustment. Winter adjusted to fire. It always had. It might be that the war would be not victory on a single day, but the long act of learning which parts of the cold would not crack and which parts would. It might be that the best the living would do would be to survive together and call that a win. She breathed, and the breath was a message to herself as sharp as the first time she had realized she could not be hurt by heat. I am still here. When the Night King came again, the world had changed. He found the same walls, the same tree that had watched other winters and taken their measure. He also found faces changed by the person-shaped loss and return they had undergone. The living moved like an argument that had learned to make itself without shouting. They had learned the hinge and how to oil it with names. They had learned that sometimes knives fall and fire misses, and a man must step into a harm and call it his because love isn't a promise that you will not be burned. It's a decision to make of the burn a brighter thing than cold. The dead broke around the Godswood a second time. The Night King reached for what he had failed to keep, and Jon stood and did not give himself this time. He kept himself. He did it not only for span of story reasons, but for the very small ones, the apples in a bin and a sister's laugh and a wolf's wait, the way a certain board in a corridor creaked and made sneaking sweets out of the kitchen a stupid idea. Winter contended. It always will. But on that day, in that place, it found that the world was being stubborn back. Weeks after, when the snow came less sideways and more downward, the dead retreated to a boundary only Bran could see. He said it would hold until it did not. He smiled like a boy who knows he will not be believed by anyone who wants guarantees, which is to say, by everyone. John walked the walls with Ghost pacing ahead to show him where the ice made treachery. He would sleep and wake and continue to be a person made partly of winter and partly of everything else. He would be haunted and also whole in a way that does not look like wholeness to anyone who has not been broken. He would be loved, which was the riskiest magic of all and the only one worth its price. In the Godswood, the tree matched the silence of a world that had not ended after all. The leaves shivered. The red sap was still. It held in itself a memory of blue and of a boy who had passed through it with his name in his pocket like a charm and came back with it still in his hand. When the wind moved through it, some swore the leaves whispered, but that was people wanting stories. The tree knew better, kept watch. They brought him out at dusk when the colors were kind because truth loves a soft light even if men do not grant it one. The spattered platform had been scrubbed. The sword that had done too much work was in its scabbard. The boy king had not yet come to learn what impatience does to a kingdom. He was still digesting the pleasures of his small cruelties. Sansa had been positioned to watch. Arya was gone in the way a little girl can be gone in a crowd when everyone thinks they know where a little girl belongs. The crowd surged like a sea that did not intend to drown or spare. It only intended to look. Ned Stark stood straight because he had always stood straight. His hands were bound. There was a small smile on his mouth that did not belong to the word smile. It belonged to something else, something like comfort taken from faith that the last thing he did would be a lesson to his daughters. You can choose. He said the words he had been told to say, because he had measured pride and found it was worth less than their lives. The words fell like heavy fruit from a tree and rolled under the boots of men who were not listening. When the cry went up for the sentence to be carried out, the platform shifted. Not because the city loved him. The city does not love. It hungers. It rained down bits of straw and pigeon and breathes. But the platform shifted because there are always men paid to do small jobs at the edges of large crimes. One of those men was missing 2 fingers. Another wore a hat that meant he had once sailed. The rope that should have held a gate shut came free. The plank that should have been hammered good and proper at the hinge had not been. The executioner moved. The plank did too. Ned fell not onto the block, but through the stone floor where a trapdoor learned suddenly what its own name meant. The crowd gasped. The guards shouted. The small man who had arranged it, the one with kindness enough to hate it, gave a signal with his eyes and then turned those eyes elsewhere because he was built to bear guilt and had new cargo today. The tunnel was close and smelled of old water and secrets. One of the boatmen grunted, hauling him along like a sack of grain that could speak if necessary but would be wiser if it did not. The catacombs breathed cool on their faces. At a bend, a rat regarded them and decided it did not wish to be involved. Down, then down again. The river waited like a mouth. They put him into a skiff that had known whole nights without moon. The skiff's stern bore old gouges where cocklines had bit into it in storms. The boat slid free into blackness. They rode under arches and past the stink of a city that had just seen what it had paid to see. They rode until river became sea and the world smelled larger. The 2-fingered man breathed through his teeth and did not look back. The sailor in the hat checked the sky for threats beyond weather. Ned listened to their silence and began to understand the shape of the debt. He now owed to men he had not chosen to owe anything to at all. They put him on a larger craft that had known ropes and languages Ned had never seen in letters. The captain of this ship called himself Morroquo and would not say where he was born. He acted as if the sea had birthed him, and that was sufficient. He tugged his beard and squinted at Ned and took his payment from a man in a hood and asked nothing else. Coin passed hands in quiet. The hooded man told Ned, "You will go north." Ned had many questions. He asked none. He knew the long geometry of survival demanded you take certain lines on faith. They sailed. The voyage up the coast was a school for patience. The ship showed Ned the cost of movement. The way a mast creaked when it had made a decision it would not undo. The way ropes sang when wind pulled at them like a lover who did not know the word no. The sea heaved with secrets and tossed on the deck a fish with a knife of a face that struck at a man's shin and then went quiet. Ned slept little. He walked weakly. He was given a cloak that had belonged to someone gone and wore it as if he had lifted it from his own hall. He dreamed on certain dawns that he had died as honest men die, with the truth neat at his feet like a good rug. He woke and felt the enormous trouble of being alive. They brought him ashore at White Harbor in a fog thick enough to hide a city but not thick enough to hide grief. Lord Wyman received him in a room that smelled of flour and lamp oil and old oaths. He wept great round tears and later denied it. Ned ate bread he could tear with his hands and drank something that warmed him without burning him. Men stood at the doors with spears held upright in a way that announced reverence. He wanted to sit in the corner like a tired man and not be watched. That passed. He stood instead and said, "Rob, Adar, Ivarin." Wyman answered, "King in the north." All the old vows said out loud, all the old words found again. He paused, because he knew that words do not undo a room overthrown, a hand severed, a homeland in enemy gloves. "He believes you dead. Let that belief stay," Ned said quietly, surprising himself with the speed of the decision, and then recognized it as an old piece of him. "You do not show the knife you mean to use." Caitlin had once chided him for making plans that took the shape of silence. Her voice came to him now clear and tart. He looked at Wyman. "He will go south to avenge me. He will be pulled into their game. They are better at it. I would rather he remain the wolf he is and not become a fox." "Then you will go to him?" Wyman asked. "Not yet." Ned turned to the windows where the fog made the sea a wall. "I must go north." "What would you avenge there?" Wyman asked and then nodded, for he had answered his own question. "Everything. You'll go to bury your enemies and your dead. You'll have to tell me which are which." The raven they sent did not go to Rob. It went to a smaller hall, built into the reeds where the air carried the smell of old water and something like patience. Howland Reed read the message and told no one until he told his children, and his children never told what they meant not to. Reed men do not wear iron often. They wear the names of places like Scale. He pulled out onto the water until he could see the sky twice and asked it for a certain kind of weather, gray with wind that comes from the west but carries with it a hint of thaw. When that weather arrived, he went to meet his friend. Ned slept a night in the neck and dreamed of a tower against a blue so sharp it made eyes water, and of screams that had never entirely stopped echoing. He woke with a certainty that almost felt like cruelty. There were things he had been wrong about, and there were things he had been too honest to be right about. It was not the same category. He traveled by small roads. White Harbor's men pretended not to see him leave. The Manderley banners went to sea on other matters. Wyman fed the city and spoke of bread. He swore to do nothing brave and then did a brave thing quietly. He kept his mouth closed. Ned went by the fisherman's tracks, by paths where deer made decisions. He walked in a cloak he did not own through forests that recognized him. The trees whispered the gossip of bark and frost. A wolf is moving. A man is moving. Perhaps they are one. At Moat Cailin, he found men who had not had a reason to be proud in an age and gave them one by asking them to draw breath and hold until he passed. They let him pass. They did not know why, only that they should. The squelch of the ground under his boots was an old friend. He could have cried from the way that sound filled him. At Winterfell, there were torches where there should not have been and a fear-solid hush. There were Bolton men in his halls, men who leaned on spears not as if they were resting, but as if they were measuring people for burial. The bastard of Bolton had not come himself. He preferred to burn before he took. His father sent men with pale eyes and empty mouths and told them to wait. It is often the waiting that breaks a place. Ned slipped into his own house like a thief. He did not go first to the high seat. He went to the crypts. He went to ask forgiveness of stone. He stood before the statue that bore his father's face, and then before the one with a younger face, the face of a boy who had died nobly and stupidly, which is to say, the only available way. He bowed his head. "I was made to live," he told them without moving his mouth. "I would have chosen to die, but I am bad at choosing for myself when the choice is easy." The crypts were quiet in the way of places that have no need to speak. They are the subjects of every story they tell. He felt a presence behind him and knew it for an old friend before he turned. "Howland," he said. Reed was thinner and richer in patience. A man whose life's work had been the long version of now. He had 2 children with him. A boy like a sapling refusing to bend and a girl like a reed that bent and did not break.
Ned bowed.
They returned it as if bowing were rowing and they had done it all their lives. "You should have told Rob," the girl said, not as a scold but as a witness. "I should have," Ned agreed. "I will. But first the North must stand." He let Howland speak of things done while he was dead. He learned that the Ironborn had moved on the coasts like rust on a sword left out in rain, but that the heart of the winter country still beat in halls he knew. He learned that the young knight of Bear Island was a woman who would deafen a man with her certainty. He learned that the Boltons had turned their faces to opportunity and that the Freys had turned theirs to a mirror. He had known both things. The bad news had the sour comfort of being old news. There was a plan to retake Winterfell that required the boldness of only a few men. There was also a longer plan that required the boldness of many. Ned chose the second because he had grown old enough to distrust miracles. He sent ravens not to lords who admired themselves for being lords, but to people who woke early because a living had to be made and no one would make it for them. He called a folkmoot at a village named after a kind of hawk. He stood on a wagon and took off his hood and faced blank stares that slowed and then turned into faces that knew him. He did not raise his voice. He did not promise glory. He spoke of insult. He spoke of the North as a hearth a stranger had put his boots on. He spoke less of vengeance than of repair, and the crowd shifted toward him because repair is something they understood. A man with a scar across his nose spat and said, "Boots off our fire, then." And there were hoots for that, and there were hands wry, said. Howland moved among them with words like oil for a stiff hinge. He remembered names. He reminded the boys who were now men of a day they had caught frogs on a bank and pretended to be knights. He pointed them toward the kind of knighthood that matters. Standing where you said you would stand. Read magic is not the sort you sing about. It's the sort that gives you a second thought when you need one. He gave it to them. While they gathered under that lawful theft of the king's right to call banners, Ned made other, smaller choices that would turn out to matter. He sent a letter to Lady Mormont that contained exactly 7 lines and no flattery. He sent another to Wyman that asked for bread and sacrifices in the same sentence because sometimes they are the same thing. He sent one to the mountain clans with no letter at all attached, only a token taken from his belt that had been carved by a widower in their hills who had asked for no payment. The token arrived, and the man who held it said, "Ah." When the Bolton garrison in Winterfell finally understood that the soft noises were not soft, it understood too late. Gates closed and then opened too quickly and in the wrong direction. Men who had thought themselves owners discovered what it was to be furniture. There was fighting in the yard where Ned had taught his boys and girls to fall and get up again. There were screams that did not belong in that yard. There were also deep, wordless sounds of men punching through anger into a quieter thing that lasted longer. The Bolton captain stood on a step and tried to count. Counting failed him. The boy from Wolf's Wood with the scar across his nose put an axe in the place where numbers had been forming. Ned did not kill the captain. He did not have to. He turned his face in the direction of the Dreadfort and put his will on the road between them like weight. Roose Bolton is a man who can feel particulars like that in his bones. He put his fingers on his throat and checked his pulse and found it steady. Then he went to work. If the North is a song, the verse for the Dreadfort is sung in a timbre that keeps its own time. When Ned laid siege to it, he with hard men and women who fed themselves while they fought. He with Reed's cleverness and Manderley's ovens that never cooled. He did it like a winter that intends to end a thing. They cut the roads that fed it quietly. They used the river as a knife. They sent a rumor ahead of them that a wolf had come home and the snow would not hide him. The rumor did more damage than hunger for a while. Only then did the hunger go to work. There were sorties at night. The bastard burned little villages where old women had kept secrets. Ned had the bodies brought in and buried under cairns built with hands that shook from anger and cold. He said words over each pile because he believed that saying words makes people human again after someone else has tried to reduce them to a lesson. He slept 3 hours and woke and dressed and walked the perimeter. He watched reed men slide through water like thoughts of another way around, and watched mountain men stand in a place and make it their own by looking at it long enough. He received letters and a sword. The letters were from Rob. Thin pieces of a son's love written under the canvas of another war. The sword was Valyrian and old, and came with no claim except the weight of its own history. It had been in Manderley vaults longer than many men live. Wyman sent it without comment. Ned laid it across his knees and thought of smaller blades, of his girls and the way they had handled steel, of boys he had raised to be men who would not flinch. He also thought of a young woman in a tower and a promise that had been kept and broken at once. Catelyn came to him riding not with fanfare but surrounded by men who looked like they'd already counted the days they had left. She dismounted and did not run to him. She walked, and with every step something old in him shook until it was new again. She put her fingers to his face like a blind woman making sure of a friend. She said his name as if she were setting it down on a table gently because it had been cracked. He leaned into her hand and let himself become the person she had always made him, the man who could sometimes be merciful without being foolish. There was no time for much. There was time for this. They planned together as they had when they were young and poor in victory. She did not tempt him toward cruelty. He did not tempt her toward mercy that would cost their children. They named enemies and put them into reasonable groups. They named more dangerous things, their habits. They spoke aloud the names of the phrase and decided not to go near any doors they opened. Together they wrote to Rob and told him the truth. Your father is alive. Do not come north, hold your riverlands. Do not accept invitations to dinners. Catelyn's mouth tightened when she added the last line. She knew what a line like that can do. Better to do it anyway than live near the ruins it avoids. The bastard of Bolton sent Ned a child's fingers in a box. The fingers were clean, which told Ned what he needed to know and feared already. A boy somewhere was alive and meant to be exchangeable. The bastard asked for fealty. Ned sent back a piece of cloth cut from a Stark banner, soaked with blood from his own arm. With it, he sent a note in Reed's hand because Reed's hand was rarely seen in noble halls and was therefore hard to spot when it mattered. The note said, "Come and take it." Roose did not. He would not risk himself on a wager he could not see the bottom of. He calculated, waited, starved his own men to feed the ones who might still take the yard if the gate opened. He sent his bastard to do the wickedness because Roose Bolton liked to pretend the ledger kept itself while he slept. The bastard came at night with fire and dogs and laughter as sharp as flint. The laughter cut, less than the dogs did. Ned was ready not with a perfect defense but with something more durable. His people who had decided they were his, and that meant certain things at night. The dogs ran into reeds and found reeds in their throats. The men ran into pits disguised as their future. The bastard ran into a silence that was a woman from Bear Island. He thought to swing his sword at her head. He found his arm pinned to his side by a spear well thrown from a boy who had never been told he could not do it. He went down into mud that had been planning to receive him since it had seen him coming. He did not die quickly. The island woman did not let him draw it out. At dawn they crowded the Dreadfort's gatehouse to watch a man with blue eyes that were blue only because no one had put a choice into them. Roose had not expected that his bastard's return would not include his bastard's voice. He had expected many futures. He had not expected this one. Ned rode up to the wall where Roose stood and raised his hand and let it drop. The mountain men raised hooks and pulled stones loose, not because the stones were the best place to attack, but because this was the place a man should be attacked. In his pride. The hooks made old ache in the Dreadfort's bones and reminded it that it had been built of things that remember. The wall did not fall. It bent. That was enough. The final fight was not a duel. It was something less pretty. Roose Bolton bled behind a door that had never quite fit into its frame right. He bled from a wound that had not been meant for him and had to be persuaded at sword point to accept him. Ned stood over him as he went from a noun to an example. He did not make a speech. He did not find an epigram. He said only that the North had been made uncomfortable in its own house, and he had come to make it comfortable again. He ended a bloodline's claim to cleverness. They hanged men who had taken too much pleasure in orders. They let others go with a mark on their cheek that would say for years, "The next time you are offered a choice, remember this." Reed's children stood watch the night after as crows gathered to do their cleaning, and as the heads of new decisions cooled. Caitlin slept at a table because sitting down had been enough to tell her body it could rest. Ned wrote 3 more letters. He sent one to his son that told him he was proud and sorry in a way that would not burden the boy but would tell him he was not alone inside his decisions. He sent one to Sansa that told her to swallow nothing she could not digest later. He sent one to Arya. He wrote and tore that one up and wrote again and did not write anything like instructions. He wrote only her name and then a story about a little girl who had stolen tarts with her sister and had been forgiven because the tarts were excellent and she had said thank you when it mattered. He sealed them, waxed the seals with his ring, thought better of it, and pressed his thumb into each seal instead. The Riverlands held. Robb had to give up something to keep something else. He sent the Blackfish to do work that required a meaner honesty than Robb possessed. The boy learned the language of treaties without saying it out loud. He refused to attend any gathering where music was promised. In the capital, the Boy King learned the shape of fear by touching it and not liking how it touched him back. The Queen learned that lies can spoil in the air if not consumed. The Queen's father learned that someone was playing a longer game in the north than he had credited, and he wrote carefully on a sheet of fine paper because there is a way good paper makes a man more thoughtful. He died before he could send the letter. Such is timing. Winter came not all at once but in installments. Fires had to be fed. Justice had to be fed too, and how you feed it determines the taste of your days afterward. Ned placed men where he would not have when he was younger. He put women where their lack had once been considered a fact instead of a choice. He sent someone with a good laugh to each hall that was too grave, more potent than a dozen nights. He sent food to those who would not ask. He made friends with silence and told it to keep secrets for him. He kept himself smaller than the legend that would have blown him up into something bright and short-lived. The letter to Robb finally found the boy in a tent smelling of damp wool and horse. The boy read it and wept and did not lose a day to weeping because you cannot. He sent ravens in every direction saying what his father had feared but now embraced. The North would not be a piece in anyone's game. It would be the board, and if the board iced over, they would sand it and play on. News of Roose Bolton's death went downriver like warmth. At Winterfell, the great wheel that had turned through good harvests and lean ones resumed its old rotation. Women argued over the placement of barrels. A man who had snored in a way that woke others was given a place to sleep alone and was grateful in a way he could not describe. Children slid on ice and bruised their small pride and got up and did it again. Ned walked his halls and paused in doorways to listen. He had once thought he knew all the sounds a hall could make. He found he had missed a few. He bent to pick up a wooden sword someone had left in a passageway and left it on a bench where its owner might find it again. In the crypts, he spoke again to stone. He told his father he had lived because he had been made to live and because sometimes living is the only way to make a proper end. When the end comes, if it comes. He told the boy who had died that he was still sorry and that the sorrow had aged into usefulness. He told his sister that her son was safe. He used a name he spoke rarely, only in the dark. The heir did not answer. Heir rarely does. He left the offering anyway, the best kind, time. The ravens brought news from the wall. A cold more. Deliberate than before. Men missing and the sky holding its breath. Ned took this not as surprise, but as something he had known was coming but had not had the leisure to panic over. He sent men north who did not mind long dark. He sent Bran to the heart tree with his eyes. He sent a quiet to Winterfell that had nothing to do with surrender and everything to do with making room for that next enemy. Revenge is a thing that can make you thin, strip you down until you think you are lean and ready. If you do it badly, you end up only thin. Ned had done enough of it to be ready now to do something else. In the morning, Caitlin found him sitting where the first light touched the floor and opened it like a book. She knew that look on his face. It was the one he had worn when he decided to ask her father for her hand. The one he had worn when he decided to bring home a bastard and tell her nothing about the boy's mother because he had promised and did not bend promises. She made tea because tea makes conversations more possible. She handed him a cup and said, "What now?" "Now we stop marching for a day," he said. "We listen for the next footfall." He looked up and smiled in the small way that had always undone her because of how undeserved it was. "And we tell our daughters, when they come in, that we will not make them into our stratagems. We will let them be exactly as dangerous as they are, which is to say, very." He did not know if he had saved anything yet. No one ever does until later, and sometimes not even then. He knew only that the stones under his feet felt more like the stones that had lifted him when he was small. He knew that his own face, seen in a certain piece of polished metal, had grown harder and kinder both. When the next winter trouble came down from the true north, he would meet it not as a man scalded by a city's fire, but as what he had always meant to be, the one who makes a place livable, which is to say defendable, which is to say loved.